This is our first time videotaping here, so one of our problems is the person talking to you doesn't come up well on the screen when there's an illumination on it. So I'm going to turn these lights back on, and I'm going to introduce Renee. Come on over. Where would you be comfortable?
Oh, I'm comfortable right here.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Renee DiPilato, and effective October 1st, I am the new director for Sarasota County Libraries and Historical Resources. So I'm really pleased to be here and to be serving this wonderful community. And Kathy asked me to just give you a brief introduction about myself and my background. So I have spent my whole career in libraries, which is somewhat unusual. Oftentimes people come to libraries as a second career. But I am a career librarian. I started in my hometown of Virginia Beach, Virginia, and for the last 14 years, I was with the Alexandria Library in Northern Virginia. And I held a variety of positions in Alexandria, and including most recently, deputy director. And in that role, I have the privilege to supervise our local history and special collections department. So one of the things that attracted me to Sarasota was the fact that I would have oversight of historical resources here. I do have a background in history, I love history, and I also have roots in this area. My mother's family was in St. Petersburg, so I spent many, many wonderful summers on the Gulf Coast. I grew up as a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, and even my kindergarten photo, I am wearing a Buccaneers jersey, so the orange one. So I'm just really delighted to be here, and we have a wonderful library system. I don't know if you're library users, but if not, I really encourage you to come back to the library. We have some really exciting initiatives coming up, including Sunday hours at 2 of our locations. So in the new year, we're going to have the Selby Library open on Sundays, and most likely the Jacaranda Library in South County. So we're really thrilled that we can expand the service and frankly restore some of the hours that had been lost that used to be offered. In Sarasota County, our mission for our library system is to provide access to information, promote lifelong learning, and provide opportunities for people to make connections within the community. So we are much more than books. We offer lots of events, digital resources, workshops, technology classes, tax assistance through AARP during tax season. So if you haven't been to the library in a while, I encourage you to come back. And if you have any questions about the library, I'd be happy to answer. I know we're a little short on time.
That's okay. Any questions? Well, I really want to thank you, and I really want to encourage you about restoring the hours that went down with the recession. That's really important. And your interest in historic preservation is really important to us. This is a very active community in history. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Okay. In our presentation, we generally ask for you to write down a question if you have something that arises during the presentation. And if you want a card, an index card, just raise your hand. Somebody will bring you an index card and a pen. And then when you hold it back up, we'll come get it. We've got plenty of them. The moderator for the discussion tonight was supposed to be Lori Muldowney, who was a historic preservation officer for the county for a very long time, and most of us knew her very well throughout her career. Unfortunately, she had an emergency and was not able to come tonight, so we're going to change our procedure a little bit. Originally, she was going to moderate Dave and Aaron, and then also ask them specific questions and deal with questions from the audience and assign them sort of to them. So I'm going to invite Aaron and Dave up. I presume you're going first, Aaron, right? Oh, Dave's going first. And you've got some slides. Now, Tom, are they coming up okay with the lighting or not?
They should be all right.
Try one. Let's see if we can leave the lights on, because when you're videotaping and there's a projection going on, what happens is the person that's speaking sort of gets washed out. Yeah, you're on. Okay. How is that coming up on the camera?
Good.
Okay. So we're going to stay with the lights initially. And if you'll come over here.
I'm just going to, so I can run the computer, I'm just going to stand right in front of the computer.
Okay.
But make sure you use the microphone.
Since I got to hold the microphone. I'll try not to fall tripping on these wires. So my name is Dave Baber. I've got a background in historic preservation. I've got about a little over 40 years of experience in the historic preservation field in Connecticut, Virginia, and in Florida, both in Sarasota County, where I ran the Department of Historical Resources for 13 years, and then over in Broward County for a while. So I have been asked to put this program together with Aaron, and I'm going to be talking about what is a historic district and why do you want one? And then Aaron is going to talk about the process for creating a historic district. Okay, so throughout Sarasota County, there are a lot of older neighborhoods that were developed in the teens and 20s and 30s and 40s that still retain a strong sense of place that was originally developed with the neighborhood. Each of those tells kind of a diverse and unique story about how it was developed. And many of those, as I said, still possess that special sense of place and should be recognized for what they are, as a very special place. So why do you want one? So people move to neighborhoods for a lot of reasons, but very often you fall in love with the neighborhood because it's got a nice sense of place. It's unique. It's got a very homey kind of character to it. And historic neighborhoods are particularly special because as they develop, there's a lot of different historical styles where the buildings were built during different time periods. And they really are, give a really nice sense of living there. Generally, the buildings are of a really kind of human scale, and they relate to the street historically, and which gives you a sense of neighborhood. You get to know your neighbors better if you kind of the house is directed to the street as opposed to a backyard. Once you designate a property, it kind of protects that sense of place and time. There are standards that you have to follow if you're going to do improvements to the exterior of a building, which assures a level of quality and continuity to the site. And it assures you that your neighbor isn't going to be allowed to do something that's inappropriate. So you can have a sense that your neighborhood is going to continue to prevail with that nice sense of place that you have. So there are a lot of myths about historic properties. So you can kind of look at them as I'm talking. And they really are myths. For example, you have to live in a museum. Well, you don't have to live in a museum. The major goal of historic preservation programs is to assure viable, flexible uses that continue over time while protecting those features of a historic building that make them special. Specifically with local historic districts, the exterior of the building is protected, and the interior is, the property owner can do whatever they want to, whatever they feel is appropriate to do with the interior to make the building usable for their needs. So these changes they are dictated by local programs. Almost every local program in the country, there are standards that they follow that were developed by the Secretary of Interior for use with the National Register of Historic Places program. And they go into very specific detail about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And again, in a local district, it only regulates the exterior of the building. One of the things people feel, well, you're going to tell me what color I can paint my building. Well, that's not true. The standards are designed to protect the building. No matter what color you paint it, you're protecting the building as long as you actually do paint it. And the standards also allow for building additions, for example. A lot of people are concerned I won't be able to add on to make it viable for me. So there are standards with where you can't put an addition on the front of a building that would obscure the original fabric, but you can put an addition on, and you work with the local staff, either the city or the county, to come up with a plan that will meet the standards and protect the building. So these Secretary of Interior standards are available online through the National Park Service. We have a listing of websites that are available that help different things. Also, Sarasota County several years ago created a design guideline that's based on the Secretary of Interior standards and gives great detail on about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate within those standards. And it gives photographs and drawings of things that are appropriate and inappropriate. So that's available from the county's website. Also, it's on that list. Let's see what I'm doing. So the last thing, it mentions property rights. People are concerned about your property rights. And it does, once you're in a historic district, your property is regulated to a certain extent, but really, these protect your property rights. It protects your property rights from neighbors who might do something inappropriate that would negatively impact your right to live where you want to live and how you want to live. Okay, so benefits and incentives. So I broke this into those that are available in the county and the city, those that are available in the county, unincorporated county, and those that are available in the city of Sarasota. I didn't reflect just Venice. I'm not certain if Venice is Venice included in this organization? Okay. Venice neighborhoods? Yeah, and Venice has a program also. So this first batch would be included in the city of Venice, except for the ad valorem tax exemption, only the county part. So let me go through some of these. So maybe 20 years ago, the state of Florida recognized that the state sets the building code. And local governments follow that code, and they can add additional things to it. But that basic code is set by the state of Florida. They recognized that in order to protect the character and quality of historic buildings, you've got to provide some flexibility. So if a building is designated either locally or in the National Register, the state building code allows for flexibility. That protects you as the owner of a historic building from having to, if you do a large project, you don't have to meet the letter of the code word for word. If it's going to negatively impact your building. For example, let's say you've got a staircase. Well, the risers are a little different than what the code requires. If it's designated, you don't have to change the staircase, even if you're doing a massive project. So the county, and now recently just the city adopted this ad valorem tax exemption, and what it does is, it's actually a nice benefit. If you do improvements to your historic property, it exempts the value of those improvements from increasing your taxes for a period of 10 years. So your property value is going to continue going up, but it'll act as though you didn't improve the property for 10 years. So that's a nice little incentive. It gives you some money back, and the city just recently adopted that also, the city of Sarasota. So the school board taxes aren't affected by it, but general government is. So that's a nice way that the county and the city can contribute a little bit. You know, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's enough of an incentive to be able to help people out. If you're on the National Register, you get this federal tax credit that gives 20% of the rehab costs, but it's specifically for income-producing properties only. So a single-family house wouldn't qualify for that, and it's got to be on the National Register. The last one, which is really significant, is this FEMA exemption. So there's a lot of properties in flood zones, and if you're in a flood zone, if you put more than 50% of the value of the improvement or the building into improving it, you have to elevate it out of the flood zone. But if it's locally designated or on the National Register, either individually or in a district, you're exempted from that rule. So you are able to do improvements and not worry about having to elevate the property out of the flood zone. Because they recognize if you have to lift a building 6 feet, it's going to dramatically impact that historical character of the building. So that's a really significant benefit that the federal government put in place. So the county has actually done some innovative incentives over time. They created an overlay district. Every single building, no matter where it is in the county, unincorporated county, that's designated individually or in a district, is part of this overlay district. So it's not this overlay district is not a contiguous boundary, it's the entire county. And what they've done is a few things. So by right, there's certain uses allowed. But if you historically designate property, by special exception, you can do other uses. Let's say, for example, you've got a house in a residential neighborhood that only allows residential, but you want to do a small business that's not going to really impact the neighborhood, a small law office or something like that. You can apply for a special exemption or exception to do that use, even though you're not allowed to do that if it wasn't historically designated. Because they recognize there's some times when the design of a historic building may not work for residential use anymore, but it will work for certain types of commercial property that are low impact. Going along with that is the reduced parking spaces. So if you have a commercial property, they have a formula that says you have so many spaces per, there's a ratio of square footage and parking spaces, but that can be reduced if it's a historically designated property, recognizing again that you might not have the space to put the parking in to do that use. And the next one is also for commercial properties, really the paved parking surfaces. The county requires if it's a commercial property that you have paved parking. But if you do paved parking, then you have to do stormwater retention. So you've got to put a pond basically on your property. Well, if you have a historic building on a small lot, you don't necessarily have the space to do that. So they said, okay, this isn't very many properties. We will waive that and allow you to have unpaved parking, shell or gravel or something like that, so that it doesn't hold water and you don't need to have this stormwater retention. This flexibility of setbacks is really an interesting one. So a lot of buildings were built, a lot of the buildings were built prior to the current zoning that set setbacks. So you might have a historic building that's built within the setback that currently exists, which is fine. That all buildings are covered by that nonconformity. But if you put an addition on, normally that addition cannot intrude into the setback. If it's historically designated by right, you can build the addition into the same level of intrusion in the setback as the original building. You can't make it worse, but you can build into that. And we've had some examples where the addition that was needed to make the building viable required that intrusion into the setback. So it's really a successful tool for preserving historic buildings. And then the same thing with landscaping and buffering. Some of the requirements for landscaping would require more space than you would necessarily have in the setback to put it in. So they recognized again, okay, we will have flexibility in that landscaping requirement to protect the historic resource. Okay, so the city of Sarasota just is in the process of developing a whole series of zoning code amendments to protect historic resources. They're only proposed at this point. I don't really have a lot of comment on it because they haven't been finalized yet, but there's some really interesting things they're talking about doing where there are conflicts between different codes, zoning code and the Secretary of Interior standards, and a historic building Secretary of Interior standards will prevail, for example. And someone similar to the county where uses in historic structures that are not normally allowed will be allowed in this. So I can't really comment on that because they haven't been approved yet. So, okay, so the next one, this is a big issue for some people, the economic impacts of historic preservation. So a lot of people think, well, if I designate it, I'm going to lose my value of my property. In 2002, the state of Florida did a comprehensive study of the economic impacts of historic preservation in the state of Florida. And they redid it in 2010 during the recession. And there's 8 different chapters that cover all sorts of different things, tourism, grant programs, and so on. But one of those 8 chapters covers the economic or the financial value of historic districts. So in both times that study was done, they looked at historic districts in 8 municipalities around the state of Florida. 18 historic districts were examined. And in each of those historic districts, there was a comparable neighborhood that wasn't historically designated that was compared to see what the difference in value was. In 2002, 15 of those districts increased in value more if it was a historic district over a non-historic district. 12 in 2010. So it was a little bit lower in 2010, but it was such a weird time with the recession. Who knows what the impact of that was.
That was me, I apologize.
Both times, 3 districts increased at the same rate. So there was no loss of value because it was a historic district. In the original 2002, none of the districts were increased at a lower value than the non-district counterpart. And then in 2010, two neighborhoods, the difference in value was higher in the non-historic district. So predominantly, historic districts do not decrease your property value. And predominantly, most cases, it does increase it. So there's a sense of stability, and it actually makes sense, because if you think about it, if you're in a historic district, if you're buying in a historic district, you're buying into a stable environment. You know that the neighborhood's not going to deteriorate because there are standards that require people to maintain their property in a historic district, which doesn't necessarily exist in non-historic districts. So that's a pretty substantial argument you get against districts. Oh, I'm going to lose my value. Well, it's just not true. Based on the study that was done by the state of Florida, it was done by University of Florida and Rutgers University jointly, both of those. So that's all I have.
Okay.
Erin's going to take over, and then
Do you
I
want
guess we'll
questions now about
No, let's
what-
wait till the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I fixed this microphone if that one's a problem.
This one seems a little funky, but it's yours. That's right. Oh, a couple more things. There's copies of the 2010 study over on the table over there. That's this one here. And this is what the design guidelines from the county looks like. You can get it on the website. There's a couple copies of a statewide project that was done, which is protection strategies for strengthening your historic building against hurricanes. So there's a couple copies of this here too, if you want to take that.
Are they available for people to take? Because there's a fellow here who wanted one of them.
There is a couple copies there. Not that the county's design guideline you can only get online. You can also get the disaster planning online. And the economic impacts, both from the state of Florida. And also Thousand Friends of Florida have this because they were actually the ones
Which one do you have more than one copy that you can give somebody? Because this fellow's from Palmetto.
It looks like there's plenty of this. There's enough for everybody to have 3 of them.
Okay.
This one, there's 2 or 3 copies available. You can have this one. Yeah.
Thank you. Erin, if you'll introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Erin DeFazio, and I am the Vice President of the Sarasota Alliance for Vice President of the Alliance for Historic Preservation here in Sarasota. And I want to just mention also that we do have a flyer that you can take away that has some links on it, and all of the information that we have been referring to, we've given you the links so that you can access it right there, yeah. So, and some of them are very long, so if you would like me to email you a copy, I would be happy to do that. There's a sign-up sheet next to it if you'd like that information electronically. So, to tag on to what Dave was saying about historic districts, we know that we want to slow demolitions and protect the historic character in our neighborhoods and prevent the inappropriate and out-of-scale infill development, which will destroy our property values and ruin the character of our neighborhoods. So, this is one of the most effective ways that we can do that. By creating a local historic district, you not only protect your investment in your home, but you also ensure the economic stability of our heritage tourism, which, as you will see in the economic benefits publication there, heritage tourism is a huge source of revenue for the state of Florida. And if we destroy all of our historic neighborhoods, that will go away. So, and plus we want to be able to leave a legacy for our children and our grandchildren. So you want to create a historic district. You know that your neighborhood is old, but you don't know if it is historic. So throughout the state of Florida and other states, there is a database called the Florida Master Site File, and this has just been updated. It's not been released yet, but in November the city will release an updated survey of all properties over 50 years old. And this is just a database which includes the address and the date of construction, and then also an initial determination of whether or not it is eligible for local or national historic designation. And there's also, it'll list the style, the architectural style. So that is a good resource. It's available on the city's website, and you can go in and you can see if the different homes in your neighborhood are over 50 years and whether or not the surveyor thought that they would be eligible initially for designation. When you're thinking about creating a district, you're going to think about structure. None of the neighborhoods are completely intact anymore. There are always structures that are going to be non-contributing. So, for example, if your neighbor tore down the house to the foundation and rebuilt a little McMansion, then that is not going to be a contributing resource. But anything that has maintained its integrity, which means that it can still speak the historic character through its exterior construction. It's relatively unchanged, can have new windows, can have some alteration because things do change over time, but it needs to still be able to have the character that you can recognize as historic. And the other thing to think about is that local districts have local significance. People think, oh, well, you know, my neighborhood is old, but it's not, you know, where the Gettysburg was, you know, fought. It's not nationally significant, but it doesn't need to be. A local district only needs to be locally significant. So a lot of our areas have importance to Sarasota. Those will qualify for local designation. The first step that you want to take when you're thinking about creating a local historic district is to initiate a conversation with the city or county preservation office. In the city, that's going to be Dr. Clifford Smith, and in the county, that's going to be Rob Bendis. And you're going to want to let them know what you are thinking about doing, ask for the appropriate nomination application, and also you can invite them to attend your meetings. One of the very first things you're going to want to be doing is looking at creating a task force to address this. Now this is the flow chart, which is complicated and you can't read it because it's a little bit blurry and it's far away. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what that is. So the process is you create a nomination application. You submit that application to the Historic Resources Department of either the county or the city, depending on where you live. The staff there is going to review that, so that's Dr. Smith or Mr. Bendis is going to review it, probably have some revisions or ask for some other information. Then once they have determined that it's complete, it'll go to the Historic Preservation Board. Owners will be notified before the board hearing of that meeting, and then the Historic Preservation Board will have the opportunity to review the application, and they will vote on and either approve or deny the application. And then once it is approved, there will be again owner notification of that approval or denial, and then it will go before the city commission or the county commission for a final vote. So that's the process in a nutshell. It's pretty simple. The biggest amount of work